Welcome back to the show. This is Mike Kegley with Larry Smith, Brad Sturdy. Today we have on a guest from my old stomping grounds. My first job after college was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I got to watch in horror because I happen to be an Illini fan. Got to watch Barry Alvarez turn that team that was a W for everybody in the Big Ten, even the Illini, into a machine. I was there from 90 to 95, and we've got Matt Perkins on. Folks, you may have heard him on the BLEAV in Badgers podcast, and of course, he's also a contributor at Badger Blitz. Matt, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Now, we were talking in the break about, is there a sense of optimism? What's the feeling going into a season where the Badgers have number 5 Alabama, number 23 USC, number 8 Penn State, number 25 Iowa, and number 3 Oregon on the schedule? What's the feeling up there in Madison?
The feeling is that this is a more talented roster than last year, without a doubt, but the final record may not reflect that because of that schedule. I feel like Coach Fickle has said that he feels like they have a lot more speed and athleticism, especially on the defensive side of the ball. The linebacker position has really been remade in the mold of what both Coach Fickle and defensive coordinator Mike Tressel want. But because of that schedule, because of, like you said, like Oregon and Alabama, I mean, these are teams that, they're used to playing Ohio State, 2 out of every 3 seasons and getting that talent level. Now they're going to see it multiple times in a season, and it's going to be an uphill battle.
So when you look at Wisconsin, the last few years have been kind of interesting, Matt. They've had a lot of talent. They've had certain pieces in place. The one piece that always seems to be the biggest question mark in Wisconsin is quarterback play. What can we expect from the quarterback position this year up there in Madison?
Well, Coach Vic hasn't announced it yet, but Tyler Van Dyke is going to be the guy. He said it was an open battle with Braden Locke, who was the backup last year to Tanner Mordecai. Started a couple games when Mordecai was injured, but in the open scrimmage this past Sunday to the media, and in the past couple practices that have been open to media, Tyler Van Dyke has been getting all the first team reps. So you can be pretty sure that when the season opens, it's going to be Tyler Van Dyke behind center. He has a much bigger arm than Tanner Mordecai, and I know that there's a lot of optimism about him and the fact that he's going to be able to drive the ball downfield a lot better than Mordecai did. He's, getting in sync with Phil Longo, I think is interesting, right? Because Van Dyke had I think like 4 offensive coordinators in 4 years at Miami, and he did his best under Rhett Lashley. And Rhett Lashley and Phil Longo, not only do their systems look similar, but they use a lot of the same verbiage. And so he's done a pretty good job of picking up the system from what everyone has said. Now, there are still some errant throws that are head scratching at times, but I feel like there is more potential for explosive plays, and that's something that this offense really lacked last season. I think the one other thing that you can expect from Van Dyke that you didn't see at Miami is more designed runs. He is a sneaky good athlete, and there will be opportunities for him to run, especially as the offensive line has some question marks on it, I should say, at this point in time. So they may need to use the quarterback in the run game in order to make it so that their defenses aren't just keying straight in on the running backs.
So over the decades, of course, Wisconsin's known for these massive road grader offensive lines and just smash mouth football. Is that what Luke Fickle wants to play, or does he have different designs for what Wisconsin football is going to evolve into under his watch?
He still wants that same toughness, that same nastiness. And that's why, he was very quick to make a change in offensive line coach from last year to this year. They got rid of the guy that they brought in last year and brought in AJ Blazik from Vanderbilt, who was a former center at Iowa, very much a Midwest hard-nosed guy. And then with the expansion of on-field roles, they've also brought in Casey Robach, who was an All-American center for the Badgers, was one of sort of the three head guys in their recruiting department, has been with the program for a long time, and they've brought him into an on-field role as well as assistant offensive line coach. And they've now got 20 guys in that room. It is a huge, huge room. And even though it is an air raid system in name, there's going to be they're going to be running the ball. And I think they're actually going to be running the ball more this season. They really like the talent that they have in that running back room. Braylon Allen was a square peg in a round hole. He just did not fit that system whatsoever. He's an eye back. He's a guy that needs to come downhill, have lead blockers. And then once he gets to the second level, he's devastating. But he doesn't have that really quick accelerating burst that you need from someone like a Javonte Williams or a Michael Carter when you saw Phil Longo's system working at its best in North Carolina. They love Tawi Walker, the Oklahoma transfer. He's been a revelation since he got on campus this winter. Expect a lot out of him. Everyone, Ches Malusi will probably be RB1 at the beginning of the season, but it would not surprise me at all to see Walker take as many snaps, if not more than Malusi, as the year goes on. So I think we still will get that tough nose offensive line approach. And there are some road graders on this team. Do not get me wrong. Jack Nelson, fifth-year senior, is back. Riley Mahlman, the right tackle, who is just a mountain of a man at 6'8". And, they like the interior of this offensive line. Jake Renfro was injured pretty much all of last year, only played in the bowl game against LSU. And last year they had Tanner Bortolini, who was drafted by the Colts and, should be a rotational piece for the Colts this year, but he was miscast as a center. He's a guard. And he had a lot of issues snapping the ball. You saw in the LSU game, in that bowl game, there was just such better timing with Renfro, taking the snaps at center, and then bringing in Joe Brunner is probably the guy that they are most excited about, penciled in to start at left guard this year. He's a former four-star in-state recruit who brings the tough, brings the nasty, and should be a bit of an improvement there on the offensive line. The problem is depth. After the starting five, I'm not sure that they have a single guy that they're really confident that they can put in. True freshman Kevin Haywood is probably the next guy at tackle, and that's really scary when you talk about that schedule.
When you look at the schedule and having these newcomers now to the Big Ten, USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon, they play a slightly different brand of football out in the West. It's a little more wide open, a little more high-scoring games. Can Wisconsin compete in that kind of arena? Because Wisconsin games are traditionally, you're looking at 24-13, 27-22, stuff like that. Most of those schools from out in the Pac-12 that have joined, man, they're at 27 at halftime. How does Wisconsin play that game with them?
Well, I think that is one of the things that Luke Fickell was brought in to do, was brought in to sort of modernize and boost the athleticism on both sides of the ball. And when I talk about remaking that linebacker room, the guys that they've brought in are completely different bodies than they had last year. And I think that is why they went after a guy like FCS All-American John Pius at outside linebacker, Jaheim Thomas, who was at Cincinnati, then at Arkansas, now starting middle linebacker at Wisconsin, a Leon Lowry, who is a Syracuse transfer. These guys who are much better athletes and can do many more things in order to combat, these offenses from the West Coast when you have to, defend Miller Moss, USC, and those guys going for wide, when you have to defend Oregon doing all of the crazy, I don't want to say trickeration that Oregon does, but they're moving fast. And so you need the athletes to be able to move fast with them. It's pretty incredible that what Jim Leonard was able to do with guys who were much more limited athletes. I think that, across the board, you're seeing a lot more athletes on defense and they started doing that in order to anticipate this move of, teams coming in from the West Coast and going to be airing it out, going to be even more up tempo than, what they're used to seeing out of every team in the Big Ten outside of, probably Ohio State and Purdue.
As I look at the schedule, I guess it's shocking to see a Wisconsin schedule that doesn't feature Ohio State and Michigan, but then you slot in Oregon and Alabama, both home games, but nonetheless tougher than nails, and you get Penn State at home. What do you think the ceiling is for this team when it comes to wins.
The ceiling is probably 10-2. If everything breaks right and Tyler Van Dyke can, sort of recapture the form he had during his redshirt freshman season at Miami. The floor is probably 6-6 for the regular season. I think that Oregon game is going to be absolutely brutal. I'm a little bit less worried about the road game at USC. Alabama obviously going to be tough, but I think it's better to get a team with a new coach early in the season than late in the season when they've had time to gel. So, that doesn't mean I think that they're going to beat Alabama. I still think Alabama has a massive talent advantage, but you get them at home, you get them in week 3, and anything can happen. Now, it's people in Wisconsin are very disappointed that it is an 11 a.m. local kickoff. If that were a night game, I think it's a different story. I think if you give, as you well know, Mike, people in Madison aren't afraid to have a few soda pops before a game.
Yes.
And you make that a night game, and I think it's a different story. But because it's an early game, it's going to be a great atmosphere. Don't get me wrong. Big noon kickoff's going to be there. It's going to be fun, but I do worry about that a little bit for sure.
One final question on the schedule here. Is there any type of worry that South Dakota right before Alabama could be overlooked? And it kind of looks a little like App State when Michigan had to play them one year. And
it's South Dakota, not South Dakota State. If
right,
it was South Dakota State, I would be much more worried. Jackrabbits reigning FCS national champs.
Exactly.
South Dakota, not so much.
Still 10-3, right? Weren't they last year?
They're a solid squad. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that they are going to be overlooking them.
Okay.
It might be a bit of a slow start, but I would expect them to take care of business.
When you look at the recruiting that's gone on in Wisconsin, they've always had a certain base. Now with this infusion from the West Coast, can Luke Fickell expand that base and compete for more bigger stars from different areas of the country?
I mean, the big thing that they've done is they've doubled down on Ohio and Pennsylvania. You've seen that in their past couple recruiting classes. I mentioned Kevin Haywood, 4-star out of Pennsylvania. They took him right out from under Penn State's nose this past year. He's a big piece of that class. They've been expanding into Florida. True freshman Xavier Lucas is probably going to crack the 2 deep at cornerback, and they're talking about him as he's a guy that's going to be a 3-year player and then into the NFL. He's already got the body at 6'2", 190, and is one of the fastest guys, if not the fastest guy in the cornerback room. I don't necessarily expect them to really be expanding out to the West Coast necessarily, but they've been hitting Texas and Florida much harder, and then also the East Coast. They've got commits from New Jersey and Connecticut, and they've been hitting Maryland, and they've been hitting these areas a lot more. Places that when you look at those Rose Bowl teams of the late 90s, and some of those really good squads of the early 2000s, they were on East Coast guys a lot, and I think they're going back to that, and I think that could be a really interesting place for them to continue to recruit and develop talent.
Excellent. Well, folks, that was Matt Perkins. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can find him on Believing in Badgers. That's the podcast that he's both the host and producer. And of course, you can also look at his contributions at Badger Blitz. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And folks, we will be right back after these messages.